The reflection staring back at me wasn't a ghost, but she felt like one. For 2 years I had allowed my ex-husband Justin to erase me. He took my confidence, my home, and my future, replacing me with a younger, shinier model. Tonight was the Innovatech Solutions annual gala, the one night of the year I couldn't avoid him in his smug satisfaction. I was prepared for the pitying stares, the whispers, his condescending smirk. I was prepared for my own personal hell. What I wasn't prepared for was him cornering me, his mistress dripping in diamonds on his arm, ready to deliver the final public humiliation. And I certainly wasn't prepared for what I did next, or for the man whose world I was about to crash into. The anniversary of a divorce is a strange beast. It isn't celebrated like a wedding, nor is it mourned like a death, yet it carries the weight of both. For me, Natalie Pierce, it was today. 2 years since the ink dried on the papers that officially severed my life from Justin Caldwell's. 2 years of learning to sleep in the middle of the bed again. 2 years of referring to myself as I instead of we. My life now was a quiet, orderly thing. I lived in a modest apartment in the city, a place that was mine and mine alone, filled with secondhand books and thriving potted plants. My work at Innovatech Solutions was my anchor. As a senior data analyst, I found comfort in the clean, predictable logic of numbers. I could make sense of algorithms and predictive models. They, unlike people, never lied or changed their minds unexpectedly. I was good at my job, brilliant even though you wouldn't know it. I existed in the background, a ghost in the corporate machine, producing insightful reports that my department head, a man named George Peterson, would present as his own with a few minor tweaks. I never complained. It was easier to be invisible. Justin, of course, was anything but invisible. He was a vice president in the marketing department at the same company. He was charisma and ambition poured into a tailored suit. We had met at Innovatech, a classic office romance that had blossomed into what I thought was a forever love. I had supported his climb up the corporate ladder, editing his presentations late into the night, hosting dinners for his superiors, and sacrificing my own ambitions for his. I was the steadfast, reliable foundation upon which he built his empire. And then when the empire was secure, he replaced the foundation. Her name was Tiffany Reed. She had been his executive assistant, a 20-something with flawless skin, a razor-sharp wardrobe, and an ambition that rivaled Justin's. I discovered their affair through the classic soul-crushing cliché, a hotel receipt carelessly left in a coat pocket. The confrontation was a blur of his cold, practiced excuses and my raw, shattered disbelief. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. "We've just grown apart, Natty," he had said, as if our 15 years together were a sweater he'd simply outgrown. The divorce was brutal. He used his corporate power and high-priced lawyers to paint me as unstable and demanding. I walked away with a fraction of what I was owed and a gaping wound where my self-esteem used to be. He and Tiffany were engaged within 6 months, which brought me to tonight, the Innovatech Solutions annual gala at the Grand Astoria Hotel. A night of forced smiles, cheap champagne, and corporate back-patting. It was mandatory for all employees at my level and above. For the past 2 years, I had conveniently come down with a migraine on the day of the gala. But not this year. My best friend Sarah Jenkins, a fiery lawyer who had helped me through the worst of the divorce, had forbidden it. "You are going, Natty," she had declared over the phone last week, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You are going to get your hair done. You are going to wear that stunning emerald dress we bought 6 months ago, that's still hiding in your closet. And you are going to walk in there with your head held so high you could get a nosebleed. You are not a ghost. You helped build that company with your work. You have a right to be there." Her words echoed in my mind now as I stood before my full-length mirror. The woman in the emerald silk dress was a stranger. The dress clung to my curves in a way that was elegant yet undeniably powerful. My usually practical brown hair was swept up in a soft, intricate style, and the makeup, which I'd had professionally done at Sarah's insistence, highlighted my eyes and gave me a confidence I didn't feel. But as I looked into my own eyes, I saw the fear. I wasn't afraid of Justin, not anymore. I was afraid of the pity. I was afraid of the whispers from colleagues who knew the whole sordid story. I was afraid of the triumphant, proprietary look Tiffany would give me, the look that said, "I won." My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Showtime superstar, remember who you are. Now go make them choke on their canapes." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that day. She was right. Hiding had done nothing but shrink my world until it was the size of my small apartment. Tonight I wasn't going as Justin Caldwell's pathetic ex-wife. I was going as Natalie Pierce, senior data analyst. I had a name. I had a place. And for the first time in 2 years, I was determined to take up space. I took one last deep breath, grabbed my clutch, and walked out the door, the silk of the dress whispering promises of a night that would change everything. The Grand Astoria Hotel's ballroom was designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings dripped with crystal chandeliers casting a golden, forgiving light over the throngs of people. The air hummed with the symphony of corporate success, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of self-important conversations, and a string quartet playing something Vivaldi-esque in the corner. For a moment, I felt my resolve falter. This was Justin's world, the world of glad-handing networking and surface-level charm. My world was the quiet hum of a server room and the stark black and white of a spreadsheet. Taking a steadying breath, I handed my coat to an attendant and stepped into the fray. The first few minutes were the hardest. I could feel the subtle shift in the room's energy as people noticed me. It was a ripple of recognition followed by quickly averted eyes and hushed whispers. I saw Brenda from accounting nudge her husband, her eyes wide. I saw Mark from logistics give me a small pitying smile. It was exactly as I had feared. I was a spectacle. The ghost had materialized and no one knew quite what to do with her. I made a beeline for the bar, needing a prop, a shield. "Champagne, please," I said to the bartender, my voice steadier than I felt. "Natty, is that you?" I turned to see my department head, George Peterson, standing beside me, his eyes bugging out slightly. "Wow, you clean up nice," he said, the compliment landing with all the grace of a dropped filing cabinet. "Hello, George," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you, too." "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were allergic to fun." He chuckled, oblivious as ever. George was the man who had built his career on my analytical work. Just last month, my deep dive analysis on market vulnerabilities, a project I'd poured 80-hour weeks into and code-named Project Chimera, had directly led to the company preempting a major competitor's move, saving us an estimated $50 million. George had presented the findings to the board and received a hefty bonus. I had received a company-wide email thanking George Peterson and his team for their hard work. Before I could formulate a polite reply, a new voice cut through the air, sharp and sickly sweet. Well, look what the cat dragged in. And there he was, Justin. He stood there, a vision of tailored perfection in a Tom Ford tuxedo, a smug grin plastered on his handsome face. And on his arm, clinging to him like expensive ivy, was Tiffany. She was wearing a crimson dress that was practically sprayed on a massive diamond engagement ring, catching the light with every slight movement. It was a calculated display of everything I had lost. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I straightened my spine. "Head high, Natty. Head high." "Justin," I said, my voice a cool, even tone that surprised even me. "Tiffany, you both look, well." Justin's grin widened. He thrived on this, on having both his past and his present on display with him as the undisputed prize. "We are. Business is booming, life is good. You remember Tiffany, of course." Tiffany gave me a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Natalie, it's so brave of you to come." Brave. The word was a perfectly aimed dart meant to frame me as a victim, a charity case. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to retreat back to the safety of my quiet apartment. But then I saw the look in Justin's eyes. It was pity, yes, but underneath it was a deep, unshakable arrogance. the look of a man who believed he had completely and utterly broken me, that he had won. And a spark of defiance, long dormant, flickered to life inside me. "I work here, Tiffany," I replied, my voice losing its tremor and gaining a note of steel. "I don't need bravery to attend a company event." I turned my gaze back to Justin. I was just congratulating George on his recent bonus, a result of that fantastic Project Chimera presentation, really groundbreaking work. George shifted uncomfortably while Justin's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He knew I was the architect of that project. He had seen my early drafts dismissing them as overly complicated and a waste of time. "Yes, well," Justin said, recovering quickly. "George's team really knocked it out of the park. Some people are meant to be in the spotlight and others, well, they're better with the numbers in the background. Know your strengths, right?" He delivered the line with a patronizing wink meant to remind me of my place. He was the star, and I was the stagehand. The humiliation was a hot flush that crept up my neck. He was doing this deliberately in front of my boss, in front of everyone, to cement his narrative of the triumphant ex and the forgotten wife. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The old panic, the feeling of being small and voiceless in his presence, was choking me. Tiffany twisted the knife. "Don't worry, Natalie. I'm sure your day will come. Maybe they'll give out an award for most improved," she said with a tinkling laugh. I stood there, frozen, the champagne flute cold in my hand. This was it, the moment I had dreaded. I had walked into the lion's den, and they were about to tear me apart. My carefully constructed armor was cracking, and the ghost I had tried to leave behind was threatening to consume me whole. Just as the silence stretched into an unbearable, suffocating blanket, a new presence made itself felt beside me. It wasn't an arrival announced with trumpets, but the effect was much the same. A palpable shift occurred in our immediate vicinity. The ambient chatter dipped. George Peterson straightened his tie and paled slightly. Justin's smug expression flickered, replaced by one of genuine shock and deference. A low, calm voice, smooth as aged whiskey, broke the tension. "Project Chimera," I read that report. "It wasn't just groundbreaking, it was visionary. The predictive modeling was some of the most elegant data architecture I've seen in a decade." I turned. Standing there was a man who seemed to command the very air around him. He was tall, with a quiet intensity that was more compelling than Justin's performative charm. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit with no tie, a statement of effortless power. His hair was dark, with distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly intelligent shade of gray, were fixed directly on me. I had no idea who he was, but clearly everyone else did. "Mr. Laurent." Justin stammered, his arm instinctively tightening around Tiffany. I didn't realize you were here tonight." Laurent. The name clicked. Dominic Laurent. The legendary, almost mythical founder of Laurent Capital, the private equity firm that had acquired a majority stake in Innovatech Solutions 6 months ago. He was the new king on the chessboard, a Silicon Valley prodigy, who had turned a small startup into a global empire. He was notoriously private, rarely attending these kinds of functions. His presence here was the equivalent of a royal visit. Dominic Laurent's gaze didn't leave my face. He gave no indication that he had even heard Justin. "The author of that report is in George's department, I believe. I've been wanting to meet them." He extended a hand to me, his expression one of genuine curiosity. "I'm Dominic Laurent." My mind raced. He thought George wrote the report, or maybe he thought it was some other rising star on the team. My moment of choice was stark. I could shrink back, let George or Justin take the credit as they always did, and remain the ghost. Or I could claim my work. My hand, surprisingly steady, met his. His grip was firm and warm. "Natalie Pierce," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I wrote the Project Chimera report." A spectrum of emotions flashed across the faces in our small circle. George looked like he was about to swallow his own tongue. Tiffany's perfectly painted smile tightened into a thin line of confusion. And Justin? Justin looked utterly thunderstruck. A flicker of disbelief warred with a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. Dominic Laurent's eyebrows raised slightly, a glimmer of respect in his gray eyes. "Ms. Pierce, it's a genuine pleasure. I have to say your work is the primary reason I greenlit the next phase of funding. You have a remarkable mind." The validation was so direct, so powerful, it was like a physical shock. For years my work had been absorbed and rebranded by others. To have the most powerful man in the room not only recognize it, but praise it, felt like stepping out into the sun after a lifetime in a windowless room. "Thank you, Mr. Laurent," I managed to say. "I appreciate that." "Dominic, please," he said with a small, genuine smile. He then turned his cool, analytical gaze towards George and Justin. "It's interesting. The official summary that reached my desk had George Peterson's name as the project lead." George began to sweat. "Well, you know it's a team effort, Mr. Laurent, a big team, and Natalie is a vital part of that team. In the background, you know, crunching the numbers." Justin, ever the opportunist, jumped in trying to regain control. "Exactly, Natty's a whiz with the raw data, always has been. But it takes a certain kind of vision to see the big picture to package it for the boardroom. That's where leadership comes in." He placed a proprietary hand on George's shoulder, attempting to form a united front. He was trying to relegate me back to my box, the numbers girl, even in the face of Dominic Laurent himself. Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but a certain coldness entered his eyes. He looked from Justin's desperate face back to mine. He saw the whole dynamic laid bare: the dismissive ex-husband, the credit-stealing boss, and the woman who had done the actual work. "The big picture is irrelevant if the foundation is flawed," Dominic said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "And the foundation of that report, its very architecture, was its most brilliant feature. That isn't leadership, Mr. Caldwell. That's genius." He turned his full attention back to me, effectively dismissing the other three. "Tell me, Natalie, what are you working on now?" It was a lifeline, a chance to step away from the toxic vortex of my past and into a conversation that was about my mind, my work, my future. As I began to explain my newest project, a nascent idea about leveraging quantum analytics for consumer trend prediction, I felt the weight of Justin's glare on my back. He was losing control and he couldn't stand it. The ghost he thought he'd buried was not only standing in the spotlight, but was holding the rapt attention of the one man he desperately needed to impress. And I knew with a chilling certainty that he wouldn't let this go. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Dominic Laurent was a phenomenal listener. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to steer the conversation. He simply absorbed what I was saying about quantum analytics, his sharp gray eyes reflecting a deep, focused intelligence. He asked incisive questions that pushed my thinking, questions that showed he wasn't just hearing the words, but understanding the complex concepts behind them. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as a wife, an ex-wife, or a subordinate, but as an intellectual peer. So by using a quantum-inspired algorithm, we could theoretically map consumer desire before the consumer is even consciously aware of it. I concluded, a flush of excitement coloring my cheeks. It's still theoretical, of course. The processing power required is immense. But the theory is sound, Dominic said, a thoughtful expression on his face. It's elegant, disruptive. Why haven't I heard about this? I haven't formally proposed it yet, I admitted. George felt it was too blue sky for our current R&D budget. A corner of Dominic's mouth twitched. George's budget is about to become significantly more flexible. The implication hung in the air, a promise of a future I hadn't dared to dream of. Behind us, I was acutely aware of Justin stewing. He and Tiffany had not moved. They were stuck orbiting our conversation, unable to leave without looking petty, yet unable to join in. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating from across the small space. He had planned to humiliate me, to put me in my place. Instead, he had become an unwilling spectator to my validation by the most powerful man in the room. His ego, a fragile and gargantuan thing, couldn't withstand it. He chose that moment to make his move. "Well, well, don't let our little Katie get your hopes up too high, Dominic," Justin said, stepping forward with a forced, jovial laugh. He draped his arm over my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look friendly but felt heavy and possessive, a brand of his past ownership. I flinched. She's always had these big, fanciful ideas. It's cute, but when it comes to the real world, the boardroom, she tends to get a little overwhelmed. She's more of a behind-the-scenes type. The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was trying to frame me as a flighty, emotional woman incapable of handling the pressure of real power. He was using our shared history as a weapon, implying a knowledge of my weaknesses that Dominic couldn't possibly have. He wasn't just trying to discredit me professionally, he was trying to diminish me as a person, to put me back into the box he had built for me. Tiffany stood beside him, a smug little smirk on her face, enjoying the show. My blood ran cold, then hot. The years of being silenced, of being made to feel small, of swallowing my anger and hurt, all of it coalesced into a single white-hot point of fury. I looked at Justin's handsome, patronizing face, and I didn't see the man I had once loved. I saw a jailer, and then I looked at Dominic. He hadn't reacted to Justin's comment, but his eyes were like chips of ice. He was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. His expression wasn't one of pity, it was one of expectation. He had called my work genius. He had treated me with respect. He was waiting for Natalie Pierce to act like the woman who wrote that report. In that split second, a decision was made. It wasn't logical. It wasn't calculated. It was pure instinctual rebellion. It was an act of self-liberation. I shrugged off Justin's arm. I turned to face Dominic, whose surprised eyes met mine. I reached up, placed my hand gently on the lapel of his perfect suit, rose on my toes, and pressed my lips against his. It was not a long kiss. It was not a passionate kiss. It was a statement. It was a full stop at the end of a sentence that had gone on for far too long. It was the taste of champagne and defiance. For a brief moment there was a surprised stillness from him, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible response, a softening of his lips before I pulled away. The entire ballroom, which had been a dull roar, seemed to fall utterly and completely silent. The string quartet faltered mid-note. Every head in our vicinity had turned. The sound that followed was a collective sharp intake of breath. I lowered myself back to my heels, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't look at the shocked faces of the onlookers. I didn't look at Dominic, whose own expression was one of stunned appraisal. I looked directly at Justin, and I watched him freeze. It was as if he'd been turned to stone. His mouth was slightly agape, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. The smugness, the arrogance, the condescending charm had all shattered, evaporating in an instant. In his eyes, I saw a maelstrom of confusion, fury, and something I had never ever seen there before. Utter and complete defeat. He looked at me, then at the billionaire standing next to me, then back at me, his mind unable to compute the reality of what he had just witnessed. His ex-wife, the quiet, mousy numbers girl he had discarded, had just kissed Dominic Laurent in the middle of the company gala. Checkmate. The silence that followed the kiss was a living thing, heavy and charged. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that span of time an entire social hierarchy was dismantled and rebuilt. Then the whispers started erupting like brush fires all around us. It was no longer about pitying poor Natty. It was about the shocking audacity of what had just happened. Tiffany was the first to break the tableau. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of ugly disbelief. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed at me, her voice a venomous whisper. But her words were just noise. My focus, and indeed the entire room's focus, was on the two men. Justin remained frozen, a statue of impotent rage. His world had been turned upside down. He, the master of optics and image, had been publicly and spectacularly upstaged. Dominic Laurent, however, was a study in composure. The initial shock in his eyes had been replaced by something else. something I couldn't quite decipher, a mix of amusement and intense calculation. He looked at Justin's stunned face, then at the gossiping crowd, and finally his gaze settled back on me. There was no anger in his expression. He gave a slow, deliberate nod as if I had just proven a complex theorem he had been considering. Then, in a move of pure strategic genius, he gently took my elbow. His touch was light but firm, a clear signal of alliance. "Natalie and I were just discussing a confidential project," he announced, his voice calm and authoritative, easily cutting through the rising tide of whispers. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply began to steer me away from the epicenter of the explosion we had created, leaving Justin and Tiffany standing amidst the social debris. As we walked, a path parted for us through the crowd as if by magic. The whispers followed us, but no one dared to meet my eye. I held my head high, my body thrumming with a terrifying and exhilarating cocktail of adrenaline and fear. What had I done? Dominic led me not out of the ballroom but through a side door I hadn't even noticed, which opened onto a quiet, deserted balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air was a welcome shock to my heated skin. The distant sounds of traffic were a soothing hum compared to the cacophony inside. For a long moment we just stood there, neither of us speaking. I stared out at the glittering tapestry of city lights, my mind racing. I had just kissed a billionaire, my new boss's boss's boss, in front of my entire company to spite my ex-husband. I was almost certainly going to be fired. "Well," Dominic finally said, his voice laced with a dry amusement. That was one way to end a conversation. I finally dared to look at him. "Mr. Laurent." "Dominic, I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. That was unprofessional and impulsive, and He held up a hand, stopping my frantic apology. "Natalie," he said, and his use of my name was strangely calming. "First, let's be clear. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for." He leaned against the balcony railing, turning to face me. "I've been in boardrooms my entire adult life. I've witnessed hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and brutal character assassinations. And I can honestly say I've rarely seen someone so effectively neutralize a threat with such precision and economy of motion." I stared at him, baffled. "Neutralize a threat?" "Your ex-husband," he clarified. "He was attempting to publicly diminish you, to poison my perception of your capabilities by framing you as an unstable, fanciful subordinate. He used his personal history with you as leverage. You in turn used a non-verbal but universally understood gesture to completely obliterate that leverage. You didn't just get back at him, you shifted the entire power dynamic of that room. Brilliantly, I might add." I was floored. I had expected anger, or at the very least a stern lecture. I had not expected a tactical breakdown of my impulsive act of defiance. I just wanted him to stop," I whispered, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a shaky vulnerability in its wake. "He has spent 2 years making me feel worthless. And tonight, when he saw that I might have something for myself, something he couldn't control, he tried to take that too." Dominic's expression softened. "I gathered as much," he said. "When I read your Project Chimera report, I asked for the preliminary submission logs. The initial file was uploaded under your name, Natalie. 3 days later, it was resubmitted from George Peterson's terminal with a new cover page. The metadata showed that Caldwell's VP-level access key was used to authorize the revision. They didn't just take credit for your work. They actively conspired to bury your involvement." The breath left my lungs. It was one thing to suspect, to feel the injustice in my bones. It was another to have it confirmed, laid out as a set of cold, hard facts by the one man who could do something about it. The betrayal felt fresh, a sharp physical pain. "I had no idea," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They underestimated you," Dominic stated simply. "And your ex-husband specifically seems to have made the critical error of believing his own narrative about you. Tonight you showed him and everyone else who you really are." A tear I hadn't realized was coming slipped down my cheek. I hastily wiped it away. This was all too much. The humiliation, the defiance, the validation, the shocking revelation. "So what now?" I asked, my voice small. "Am I fired?" Dominic actually laughed, a low, pleasant sound. "Fired, Natalie? I don't fire assets like you. I promote them. The Blue Sky Quantum Analytics project you mentioned, I'm officially funding it. Effective Monday, you will be heading a new independent R&D division. You'll report directly to me. You can poach anyone you want from Peterson's team, and your budget will be whatever you deem necessary." I felt my knees go weak. Head of a division report to him. It was unthinkable. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept." He said, his gray eyes serious. "Don't let them win by making you doubt yourself for one more second. Take what you've earned." The kiss had been an act of rebellion, a moment of madness, but it had blasted open a door I never knew existed. Standing on that balcony, with the city sprawling beneath me and the man who was offering me my entire future standing before me, I felt the last vestiges of the ghost Justin had tried to make me into finally mercifully fade away. Returning to the office on Monday morning was like walking onto a movie set the day after a dramatic scene had been filmed. The air was thick with unspoken words. The usual hum of keyboards and quiet chatter was replaced by a tense silence that broke into frantic whispers whenever I passed by. I was no longer Natalie Pierce, the quiet data analyst. I was a myth, a legend. I was the woman who kissed the billionaire. My walk from the elevator to my cubicle felt a mile long. People stared openly, their faces a mixture of awe, envy, and morbid curiosity. Brenda from accounting gave me a wide-eyed thumbs up. Mark from logistics practically bowed. It was surreal and deeply uncomfortable, but underneath the discomfort, there was a new unfamiliar feeling power. My actions had consequences, and for the first time those consequences weren't things happening to me, but things happening because of me. My first order of business was to bypass my old desk entirely and head straight for George Peterson's office. I knocked once and entered without waiting for an invitation. He was on the phone, but his face went ashen when he saw me. He quickly mumbled an excuse and hung up. "Natalie," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. "I was just about to call you. I heard there are some rumors." "They're not rumors, George," I said, my voice even and calm. I placed a single sheet of paper on his polished desk. It was a list of 4 names, the brightest, most underutilized analysts on his team. "Mr. Laurent has approved the formation of a new quantum analytics division. I'll be leading it. These are the people I'm taking with me. Human Resources will send over the official transfer papers this afternoon." George stared at the list, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was losing his best people, the very foundation of the team he supposedly led. He was being hollowed out. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "They're essential to my Q4 projects." "Then you should have thought of that before you put your name on my Q2 project." I replied without a shred of malice. It was just a fact. I turned and walked out, leaving him sputtering in my wake. There was no pleasure in it, only a grim sense of accounts being balanced. The main event, however, came an hour later. An urgent all-hands email summoned the entire marketing department to the main conference room. Whispers intensified. My new temporary office had a direct view of the glass-walled room. I watched as Justin walked in, his face a tight mask of anxiety. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Tiffany was not present. Rumor had it she hadn't shown up for work at all. A few minutes later, the company's CEO, Robert Miller, and 2 board members walked in, followed by a woman from Human Resources. They did not look pleased. The meeting was brief and brutal. Though I couldn't hear the words, the visuals were telling. Justin gesticulated wildly, trying to explain, to plead. Robert Miller's face remained impassive. The HR representative slid a thick folder across the table. Justin's shoulders slumped. He had been so adept at playing the corporate game, but he had broken the one unspoken rule. He had embarrassed the company in front of its new owner. The king had been publicly humiliated, and the board was cutting its losses. He walked out of that room a different man. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollowed-out look of utter shock. His colleagues avoided his gaze. As he passed my office, his eyes met mine through the glass. There was no anger left, only a raw, desperate confusion, as if he was trying to understand how the woman he had deemed so insignificant could have possibly engineered his downfall. But I hadn't engineered it. He had built his own guillotine. I had simply let it fall. He was escorted to his office to pack his things and was gone from the building within the hour. Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tiffany. Her voice was stripped of all its usual confidence. "I just wanted you to know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that I left him, at the gala. I saw his face when it happened. He didn't look at me. He didn't even care I was there. All he cared about was that he had lost, that you had won." She took a shaky breath. "I was a prop, a shiny object to make him look good. I thought I was smarter than that." "I'm sorry, Tiffany," I said, and to my surprise I meant it. She had been a willing participant, but she was also another victim of Justin's all-consuming ego. "Don't be," she said with a bitter laugh. "You're free, and now I guess I am too. Good luck, Natalie." She hung up. The day was a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and introductions. HR fast-tracked everything. My new division was given a prime suite of offices on the executive floor. The 4 analysts I'd chosen accepted my offer with stunned enthusiasm, eager to work on something new and exciting. By 5 o'clock, I was standing in my new office, an office 4 times the size of my old cubicle, with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. It was quiet. The chaos had subsided. Justin was gone. George was neutered. A new future was laid out before me, a future built not on a man's approval, but on my own mind and my own merit. The kiss had been the catalyst, the spark that lit the fuse, but the groundwork had been laid over years of quiet, diligent work. Dominic Laurent hadn't saved me. He had simply opened his eyes and seen the person who was there all along. The reckoning was over, and as I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I knew with absolute certainty that this was not an ending but a beginning. The weeks that followed were a tectonic shift, a remaking of my professional and personal landscape. The theoretical concept of leading a new division became a tangible reality, a whirlwind of intense, exhilarating work. My new office on the executive floor, with its panoramic view of the city skyline, felt less like a workspace and more like a command center for my own life. The ghost of Natalie Pierce, who once haunted the quiet cubicle farms on the 4th floor, had no place here. She had been replaced by a leader. Building the quantum analytics division from scratch was the most demanding and deeply fulfilling endeavor of my life. My team, the 4 brilliant minds I'd rescued from the purgatory of George Peterson's mismanagement, was a powerhouse of innovation. There was Liam, a caffeine-fueled coding prodigy who saw data streams like a composer sees a symphony. Maria, a quiet but fiercely logical strategist, who could find the fatal flaw in any proposal in under 5 minutes. And the twins, Ben and Leo, whose competitive synergy produced some of our most groundbreaking algorithms. We were a small, agile unit, an island of focused creation amidst the vast ocean of corporate bureaucracy. Our days were a chaotic symphony of whiteboard diagrams, furious keyboard clatter, and the constant fragrant aroma of brewing coffee. We argued, we celebrated, we pushed each other past our limits. And for the first time in my career, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My interactions with Dominic were a constant, a gravitational center around which my new orbit stabilized. We had our scheduled weekly progress meetings via video conference, his sharp, intelligent face filling my screen. He was a demanding boss, his questions always probing, always pushing me to defend my conclusions with irrefutable data. He dismantled my arguments only to force me to rebuild them stronger. In one memorable meeting, he challenged a core assumption of our predictive model. I spent the next 48 hours without sleep, running simulations and digging through raw data until I found the proof I needed. I presented my findings to him the following day, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. He listened intently, and when I was finished, a slow smile spread across his face. "Good," he'd said simply. "I was hoping you'd prove me wrong." It wasn't just a job. It was a mentorship, a high-stakes intellectual sparring match that left me feeling sharper and more alive after every round. Beneath the rigid professionalism, however, an undeniable undercurrent flowed between us. It was in the way his eyes would hold mine for a beat too long after I'd made a particularly salient point, or the shared knowing smirk we'd exchange when another executive used a tired corporate platitude. The gala and the kiss was the elephant in every virtual room we shared, a silent, unspoken event that was never mentioned but always present. It wasn't an embarrassment. It was the strange, supercharged catalyst for everything that had followed the foundational event of our entire professional relationship. One Friday evening, nearly a month after that fateful night, the energy of the work week had finally dissipated. My team had gone home, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the office. The city outside my window was a glittering tapestry of light against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. I was at the whiteboard, lost in the elegant sprawl of an algorithm trying to solve a particularly stubborn latency issue. I was so engrossed sketching out data flows with a black marker that I didn't hear the soft click of my office door opening. "I thought I might find you here," a calm voice said from the doorway. I spun around, my heart giving a startled leap. Dominic was leaning against the doorframe, his presence filling the space. He was dressed in dark, well-fitting jeans and a simple charcoal sweater, the casual attire a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. It made him look younger, more accessible, and somehow more real. "Burning the midnight oil?" I asked, a nervous smile touching my lips as I put the cap back on my marker. My hand felt smudged with ink. "Sometimes the best ideas come when the building is quiet," he replied, his eyes scanning my sprawling diagram as he walked into the room. He moved with an easy, confident grace. He stopped before the whiteboard, studying my complex web of notes and equations with an intense focus that made me feel both scrutinized and seen. "This is brilliant," he said, his voice a low murmur. He pointed with a long finger to a specific junction in the flowchart. "You've bypassed the recursive loop. You've solved the latency problem." "Theoretically," I corrected, a flush of pride warming my cheeks. "We still need to build the test environment and run the simulations." "It'll work," he said with an unshakable certainty that I was beginning to recognize as his hallmark. He then turned his gaze from the whiteboard, and his gray eyes, so often analytical and demanding, were now soft and serious as they met mine. "I didn't come here to talk about work, Natalie." My breath hitched. The professional boundary that had been so clearly defined between us suddenly felt porous, dissolving in the quiet intimacy of the empty office. "Oh," was all I managed to say. "I came to ask you to dinner," he said, his voice straightforward, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "And I want to be clear. I'm not asking as your boss. I'm not asking as the man you kissed at a gala. I'm asking as a man who is endlessly fascinated by the way your mind works and would very much like to get to know the woman it belongs to." His directness was a gust of fresh air. There were no games, no hidden meanings, just a clear and respectful invitation. The old fearful part of me, the part conditioned by Justin's manipulative charm, whispered warnings. But a newer, stronger voice, the one I had been cultivating for the past month, shouted it down. This wasn't Justin, who had seen me as an accessory to his own ambition. This was Dominic, the man who had recognized my value when it was invisible to everyone else, including at times myself. "I'd like that very much," I said, and the smile that bloomed on my face felt genuine and luminous, a true reflection of the woman I was becoming. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a cobblestone side street, the kind of place you would never find unless you knew it was there. The owner, a bustling man named Gino, greeted Dominic with a warm embrace and led us to a secluded corner table. The air smelled of garlic wine and baking bread. Over plates of fresh pasta and a bottle of rich Chianti, we talked for hours. He told me about his first failed startup, the ramen noodle years, and the stubborn belief that had kept him going. I found myself telling him about my childhood love for solving puzzles, my abandoned dream of becoming an astrophysicist, and the slow, insidious way I had allowed my own ambitions to be subsumed by Justin's. He listened with a focused empathy that was profoundly healing, making me feel as though my story, my whole story, mattered. Later, as he walked me to the door of my apartment building, a comfortable, easy silence settled between us. The night was cool, and the city sounds were a distant, muted symphony. "For what it's worth," he said, stopping under the warm glow of the entrance light and turning to face me, "I'm glad you kissed me." I felt a surprised laugh bubble up. "You are?" "Yes," he confirmed, a faint wry smile playing on his lips. "It was the most interesting and audacious business proposal I've ever received." "And what exactly was the proposal?" I asked, my heart feeling light and hopeful. He stepped a fraction closer, the space between us charged with a gentle electricity. His gray eyes searched mine, their expression warm and sincere. It was a proposal to stop looking at the spreadsheets and start looking at the brilliant, overlooked analyst who was writing them. It was a demand to be seen. He paused. "And I'm very, very glad I accepted." I thought he might kiss me then. I wanted him to, but he didn't. Instead, he reached out and gently took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It was a gesture of connection, not of possession, a promise of something beginning, not a claim of victory. It was an act of profound respect, an acknowledgement that I was on my own journey, and he was willing to walk at my pace. "Good night, Natalie," he said softly before letting my hand go and stepping back. As I closed my apartment door behind me and leaned against it, a sense of deep, abiding peace washed over me. The fire of Justin's betrayal had been devastating, burning my old life down to the foundations. But I was learning that sometimes a fire is necessary to clear the land for new growth. I had found my voice, my power, and my self-worth, not in the reflection of a man's love, but in the steady, quiet confidence of my own capabilities. The future was no longer a straight, predictable line that someone else had drawn for me. It was a complex, beautiful quantum equation of my own design, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to solve it. Natalie's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our lowest moments are just the launching pad for our greatest comeback. She thought she was walking into a night of humiliation, but she walked out with a future she built herself. Her journey wasn't about the billionaire's rescue. It was about her finally claiming the power and talent she had all along. It's a story of karma, of resilience, and the incredible things that can happen when you refuse to be erased. What did you think of Natalie's moment of defiance? Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up and reclaim your own story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you and sharing in these stories of strength. If you were inspired by Natalie's journey from a ghost in the machine to the head of her own division, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.
A single sentence can shatter a world. For Isabella Rossi, that sentence was uttered over a $400 plate of seared scallops she couldn't afford by a man she thought she loved. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Honestly, Izzy," he said, his voice a polished blend of pity and condescension, "this little coding project of yours, it's a cute hobby, but it's time to be realistic. It's never going to be your career." He didn't know that in 6 weeks, that cute hobby would make her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. And he definitely didn't know that the first thing she'd do with that power was buy the very company he was desperate to become a partner in. His world was about to be shattered, and she was the one holding the hammer. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name that dripped with the kind of old-world money that Brendan Cole was born into, and Isabella Rossi had only ever observed from the outside. It was all dark mahogany, hushed conversations, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of men who were paid to be invisible. This was Brendan's world. He thrived in it, navigated it with an inherited ease that Isabella, for all her ferocious intelligence, could never quite replicate. She felt the familiar prickle of being an imposter. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy sheath, had cost a week's salary. Brendan's suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row, probably cost more than her car. They were celebrating his latest promotion at Sterling Wakefield, the private equity firm where his father was a senior partner. Brendan was now a vice president, another gilded step on a path that had been paved for him since birth. To the future, Brendan toasted, clinking his crystal glass against hers. And to you finally leaving that dead-end job at Innovatech. Isabella stiffened. It's not a dead-end job, Brendan. It's a stepping stone. And Project Chimera is... He cut her off with a placating wave of his hand. I know. Project Chimera. Your AI algorithm. It's brilliant, I'm sure. For an academic paper. But a real-world application. The market is brutal, Izzy. It's dominated by giants. Google, Goldman Sachs. They have armies of PhDs working on this stuff. And I have something they don't, Isabella countered, her voice low but firm. My model is different. It's not just predictive, it's adaptive. It learns from market sentiment, not just historical data. It can anticipate black swan events with a 7% higher accuracy rate than anything currently on the market. She had spent 3 years on it. 3 years of sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in her own code. It was her life's work, hidden away on a private server running simulations that were yielding results so spectacular they frightened even her. Brendan sighed, the sound of a patient parent explaining the world to a naive child. Listen to yourself. It sounds wonderful, but who's going to fund it? Who's going to take a chance on a junior analyst from a mid-tier tech firm? I'm just trying to protect you. My father has already spoken to a contact at Sotheby's. They're looking for an art history consultant. With your eye, you'd be perfect. Less stress, great connections, you can travel with me. The blood drained from Isabella's face. Art history. She had a master's degree in computational finance, another in artificial intelligence from Stanford. He was suggesting she abandon it all to become a social accessory, an intellectually stimulating companion for his high-flying life. This was the moment, the final clarifying insult in a long line of them. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in her, he actively disdained her ambition. He saw it as a character flaw, an unsightly blemish on the otherwise perfect canvas of the life he had planned for them. You don't get it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You have never not once tried to understand what I do. Because I understand how the world works, he retorted, his patience finally snapping. The polished veneer cracked, revealing the raw arrogance beneath. It works on power, on connections, on capital, not on some fantasy algorithm you built in your spare time. It's a cute little project, Izzy. A hobby. Now let's be realistic. Focus on us. Focus on a life that's real. That was the sentence, the one that echoed in the cavernous silence that followed. A cute little hobby. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. She didn't see the handsome, charming man she had fallen for. She saw a gatekeeper, a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of inherited privilege, terrified by the thought that someone, especially a woman he was supposed to possess, could build her own empire from scratch. Slowly, she placed her napkin on the table. She stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a blur. You're right, Brendan, she said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. It's time for me to be realistic. He smiled, relieved. Good. I knew you'd see it my way. My realism, she continued, picking up her small clutch from the table, is that I am sitting across from a man who is so profoundly insecure that he has to belittle my life's work to feel powerful. My realism is that I have wasted 2 years of my life with someone who sees me as an accessory, not a partner. And my realism, she took a deep breath, is that this is over. We are over. Brendan's face went from smug relief to crimson fury in a heartbeat. You're throwing this away for a fantasy. You'll come crawling back in a month when you realize you can't pay your rent. A ghost of a smile touched Isabella's lips. It was a cold, sharp thing. Don't hold your breath. She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting alone with 2 entrees, a £1, 200 a bottle of wine, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She didn't look back. As the cool night air of the city hit her face, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt liberated. She felt angry. And more than anything, she felt a burning, all-consuming drive. He thought her work was a hobby. She was about to show him and the rest of the world just how powerful a hobby could be. The week following the breakup was a descent into a specific kind of hell. The emotional fallout was brutal, but it was the professional sabotage that blindsided her. Brendan, it turned out, was not a man who took rejection gracefully. He was a man who scorched the earth. Isabella arrived at her desk at Innovatech Financial on Monday morning to find her access card deactivated. Her direct manager, a perpetually stressed but generally decent man named David Chen, met her by the elevators with a pained expression. Isabella, Arthur Finch wants to see you. Now. Arthur Finch was the CEO of Innovatech. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man who wore suspenders unironically and believed innovation was something you bought, not cultivated. Isabella had met him twice in 3 years, both times in passing. His corner office felt like a museum exhibit on 1980s corporate power. Heavy oak desk, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed wasted on him. Miss Rossi, Finch began, not bothering with pleasantries. It has come to my attention that you have been using company resources for an unauthorized personal project. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Finch Project's chimera is a breach of your employment contract, he snapped. Article 7, Section B, all intellectual property developed using company time or equipment is the sole property of Innovatech Financial. You have been running this chimera on our servers, constituting a significant security risk and a flagrant violation of policy. Isabella was floored. With all due respect, sir, the core code was developed on my personal hardware. I've only been using the servers to run simulations against anonymized public domain market data. It poses no security risk whatsoever. David knows about my work. Finch waved a dismissive hand. Mr. Chen is not the one who signs your paychecks. We have also received a tip from a highly respected source in the financial community. A tip. She knew instantly who it was from. Brendan. He must have called Finch over a game of golf at their exclusive country club. He would have framed it as a friendly warning, a concern for Innovatech's security, all while painting Isabella as a reckless, untrustworthy employee. The tip suggests your algorithm is not only unauthorized but potentially unstable and could expose the firm to legal liabilities. It was a perfectly crafted corporate assassination, vague, impossible to disprove, and coming from a source whose credibility Finch would never question. That's a lie, Isabella said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My project is sound. The simulations are flawless. I'm not interested in your simulations, Miss Rossi, Finch said coldly. I'm interested in protecting this company. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You will sign this non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. Our lawyers will be in touch. He slid a thick legal document across the desk. It was a gag order and a professional prison sentence rolled into one. It would prevent her from working in AI-driven finance for 2 years and from ever speaking about Project Chimera. She stared at the paper, then at Finch's impassive face. This was it. Brendan hadn't just broken up with her. He was trying to break her spirit, to cripple her career so thoroughly that his prophecy of her failure would come true. He wanted her to come crawling back, not to him, but to the life he had prescribed for her. "No," she said. Finch raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon. I'm not signing it," Isabella stated, pushing the document back across the desk. "You are firing me based on a malicious and unsubstantiated rumor. You have no claim to my intellectual property, and I will not sign away my right to work." Finch's face hardened. "You are making a grave mistake, young lady. We will litigate. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. Then I'll see you in court," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stood up. "You don't need to have security escort me. I know the way out." The walk back to her desk was the longest of her life. The pitying stares, the whispers. She packed her small box, a photo of her parents, a worn copy of a book on neural networks, a lucky coffee mug. David Chen intercepted her by the door, his face etched with guilt. "Isabella, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell him. I showed him your progress reports. He wouldn't listen." "It wasn't your fault, David," she said, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for believing in me." "Your work. It's revolutionary," he whispered, looking around nervously. "Don't let them take it from you." That night, in her small, overpriced apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. No job, dwindling savings, the looming threat of a legal battle against a multi-million-dollar corporation. Brendan's words echoed in her ears. "You'll come crawling back," she cried, a gut-wrenching, soul-emptying sob that left her feeling hollowed out. She was alone, unemployed, and about to be sued into oblivion. For a few dark hours, she let the despair win. She scrolled through job listings for positions she was wildly overqualified for, just to feel a flicker of hope. Then, around 3 a.m., surrounded by takeout containers and a profound sense of defeat, something shifted. The image of Arthur Finch's smug face, of Brendan's condescending smile, ignited a different kind of fire. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving them all wrong. She wiped her eyes, walked over to her custom-built desktop computer, her one true luxury, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing lines of pristine, elegant code. Project Chimera, her creation. They thought they could take it, bury it, and bury her with it. They had no idea what it was truly capable of. For the next 2 weeks, Isabella didn't just work. She waged a silent, one-woman war. She lived on coffee and protein bars. She disconnected her phone. She ignored the threatening letters from Innovatech's legal team that started piling up by her door. She poured every ounce of her energy, her genius, and her rage into the final evolution of her algorithm. She wasn't just running simulations anymore. She was preparing it for the real world. She refined the sentiment analysis module, feeding it terabytes of live news feeds, social media chatter, and political discourse. She strengthened the adaptive learning protocols, making the system so agile it could pivot its strategy in microseconds. She was building a weapon. One night, while running a final full-scale backtest against the last decade of market data, the results scrolled across her screen. The performance was staggering. If Chimera had been live during the 2008 financial crisis, it wouldn't just have avoided the crash. It would have shorted the market with such precision that an initial investment of $10,000 would have yielded over $50 million. It had predicted the dot-com bubble, the flash crash of 2010, every major market shift, with terrifying accuracy. She stared at the numbers, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. It was the key to a kingdom. But a key was useless without a door to unlock. She had the most powerful financial tool in the world and precisely $0 to implement it. Innovatech's lawsuit was coming. Her time was running out. She needed a miracle. She needed a backer with capital so vast and a risk appetite so huge that they would be willing to bet on a disgraced analyst against the entire financial establishment. She needed a ghost, and she knew of only one. A name whispered in hushed, reverent tones in the darkest corners of the tech world. A man who had vanished from public life a decade ago after his own legendary battle with Wall Street. A reclusive genius named Silas Black. Finding him was impossible. Contacting him was a fantasy. But for Isabella, fantasy was all she had left. Silas Black was more of a myth than a man. In the early 2000s, his company, Cassandra Data, had pioneered the very concept of algorithmic trading, making him a billionaire before he was 30. Then, after a brutal, hostile takeover attempt by a consortium of investment banks, an attempt he famously thwarted by liquidating their key holdings in a single afternoon, nearly crashing the Nasdaq in the process, he had simply vanished. He sold his company, took his fortune, and disappeared from the face of the earth. Rumors placed him on a private island in a fortified bunker in Wyoming, or even dead. Isabella only knew of him because of a single formative event in her academic life. During her master's program at Stanford, she had entered the prestigious Black Box Challenge, a hackathon for quantitative analysts. The anonymous sponsor of the challenge was legend, had it Silas Black himself. The goal was to design an algorithm that could find the signal in the noise of a chaotic dataset. Isabella didn't win, but she placed third. Her prize was a small scholarship and a cryptic email from a heavily encrypted address. It contained only one line. "Good work. Most people miss the ghost variable. You didn't. Keep going." She had saved the email, a digital trophy from a faceless mentor. Now it was her only lifeline. With trembling hands, she composed a new message. It was a desperate shot in the dark, an electronic prayer sent into the void. She didn't beg or plead. She laid out the facts with cold, mathematical precision. Subject the ghost variable. Project Chimera. To encrypted address. You told me once to keep going. I did. I built Chimera. It's an adaptive, sentiment-driven predictive model. It anticipates black swan events by quantifying chaotic social and political data. The ghost variables the market ignores. Backtesting shows a 92% success rate in predicting major market shifts. Beta, 0.8 48 hours in advance. I have been fired from Innovatech Financial. They are attempting to steal the IP and are suing me into silence. My ex-boyfriend Brendan Cole of Sterling Wakefield instigated it. I have the most powerful financial algorithm in the world. I have zero capital and about 3 weeks until I'm legally and financially buried. You fought the banks and won. They are trying to do to me what they did to you. I am not asking for a handout. I am offering an opportunity. My algorithm, your capital. Together we can do more than just make money. We can break the system. Attached is the white paper for Chimera and a single time-locked prediction for a minor, obscure commodities future set to mature in 48 hours. Proof of concept. Isabella Rossi. She attached the files, her finger hovering over the send button. It was insane. He probably wouldn't even see it. The address was likely defunct. And if he did see it, why would he care? She took a deep breath and clicked. The email vanished from her outbox, swallowed by the infinite web. For a full day, there was nothing. Silence. Isabella's fleeting hope began to curdle back into despair. She started drafting replies to the want ads for data entry clerks. The next evening, as she was microwaving a cup of noodles, her burner phone, a cheap prepaid device she'd bought for cash, buzzed. An unknown blocked number. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice wary. The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly, as if it hadn't been used for conversation in years. "Miss Rossi, the ghost variable in the Palladium future was the sudden union strike at the South African mine. The news broke an hour ago. The future jumped 18%. Your prediction was off by 0.2%. Isabella's spoon clattered to the floor. It was him. It had to be him. How? She stammered. Your white paper is intriguing, the voice continued, ignoring her question. Ambitious, arrogant even. I like it. Innovatech is a third-rate firm run by a fossil. Sterling Wakefield is a den of thieves. Brendan Cole is his father's son, all pedigree, no vision. I have followed your career since the Black Box Challenge. I knew you had potential. Isabella sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. He had been watching her. You have two problems, Miss Rossi, Silas Black said, his voice a low rumble. First a legal one, second a capital one. We will solve the legal problem with the capital problem. Be at the offices of Rothman, Gala and Sloane, 45th floor, tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Ask for Mr. Gala. Do not be late. And Miss Rosie. Yes, she whispered. Welcome to the war. The line went dead. The next morning, Isabella walked into a law office that made Arthur Finch's look like a suburban dentist's waiting room. A silent receptionist led her to a conference room with a single occupant, a severe-looking man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes. This was Michael Geller, Silas Black's personal attorney, a man known in legal circles as the Shark. Miss Rossi, Geller said, motioning for her to sit. Mr. Black has been most emphatic. He has instructed us to resolve your situation with what he calls maximum prejudice. For the next 5 hours, Isabella was swept into a whirlwind. Geller and his team of lawyers dissected Innovatech's case with surgical precision. They laughed at the non-compete Finch had tried to force on her. This is unenforceable trash, Geller scoffed, tossing the document aside. Arthur Finch is about to learn a very expensive lesson about baseless litigation. Then came the bigger plan. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. Silas Black wasn't interested in funding a startup. He wasn't interested in a protracted legal battle. He was interested in retribution. Mr. Black doesn't just want to protect your algorithm. Miss Rossi? Geller explained, a predatory gleam in his eye. He wants you to have the platform to deploy it. The best way to end a lawsuit from a company is to own the company. Isabella stared at him. You want to buy Innovatech. Not buy it in the traditional sense, Geller corrected. Innovatech is a publicly traded company, albeit a small one. Its stock is undervalued, and its leadership is complacent. Mr. Black has authorized the creation of a shell corporation, Prometheus Capital, with a credit facility of $2 billion. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Innovatech on the open market. It was a hostile takeover. But why? Isabella asked, bewildered. Innovatech is a dinosaur. The technology is outdated. Precisely, Geller said. It's a broken vessel, but it has the necessary infrastructure. The licenses, the regulatory compliance, the trading floor. It's cheaper and faster to buy the vessel and replace the engine than to build a new ship from scratch. And the engine is Project Chimera, and you, Miss Rossi, will be the new captain. The plan was set in motion with breathtaking speed, while Isabella worked with Geller's tech team to secure Chimera on unbreachable servers. A team of traders working from anonymous offices in Zurich and Hong Kong began buying Innovatech stock. They bought in small, untraceable blocks, careful not to trigger any alarms. The stock price began to creep up, but so slowly that market watchers attributed it to random volatility. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, oblivious, was smugly proceeding with his lawsuit, burning through company cash, to harass Isabella with legal notices. Brendan Cole at Sterling Wakefield was likely celebrating his victory, confident that he had successfully neutralized his upstart ex-girlfriend. They were all celebrating on the deck of a ship that was unbeknownst to them being bought out from under their feet. 2 weeks later, Geller called Isabella. We have it, he said, his voice calm but triumphant. As of 5 minutes ago, Prometheus Capital owns 51% of Innovatech Financial's outstanding shares. According to SEC regulations, we are required to announce our position and can call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on new leadership. The meeting is set for Monday. Monday, the day of reckoning. Isabella felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Just weeks ago, she was packing her belongings in a cardboard box. Now, she was the majority shareholder of the company that had fired her. "What do I do now?" she asked Gala. "Now," Gala replied, "you go buy a suit, Miss Rosie. The kind of suit that says, 'I own this room.' On Monday, you're not just getting your job back, you're taking his." The Monday of the emergency board meeting dawned grey and overcast, the sky a blanket of steel over the city. It suited Isabella's mood perfectly. She wasn't nervous. She was a live whale humming with a focused, cold energy she hadn't known she possessed. The suit Gala had advised her to buy wasn't just a suit, it was armor. A custom-tailored, charcoal grey pantsuit by a designer whose name she couldn't pronounce. It was understated, severe, and screamed power. She arrived at the Innovatech Tower at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the meeting. She wasn't accompanied by Gala's team. They were already upstairs preparing the ground. She walked in alone. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had watched her leave in disgrace weeks earlier, did a double take. "Miss Rosie, you're not on the visitor list." Isabella met his gaze without blinking. "I won't be a visitor for long. Call up to Arthur Finch's office. Tell them Isabella Rossi is here." She enjoyed the flicker of confusion and panic in his eyes as he made the call. She waited perfectly still, a statue of impending doom in the marble lobby. Upstairs, in the 50th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was one of confused irritation. Arthur Finch sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face florid with indignation. The board members, a collection of aging men in expensive suits, murmured amongst themselves. The only outsider present was Brendan Cole, who Finch had invited as a special consultant to discuss market strategy, a thinly veiled reward for his tip-off. Brendan looked smug, relaxed, the cat that got the cream. "I still don't understand the meaning of this, Michael," Finch grumbled at Michael Geller, who sat calmly at the opposite end of the table with two junior lawyers. "An emergency meeting called by a shell company nobody has ever heard of, Prometheus Capital. This is a disruption of our quarterly planning." "All will be made clear, Arthur," Geller said smoothly. "We are just waiting for the new majority shareholder to arrive." A new majority shareholder. A ripple of shock went through the room. Brendan's smug expression faltered slightly. He leaned over to Finch. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. Finch just shook his head, looking bewildered. Just then, Finch's personal assistant burst into the room, her face pale. "Mr. Finch, sir, there's a woman here to see you. She's in the lobby. Isabella Rossi." The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Finch's face contorted in disbelief, then rage. What? What is that insolent girl doing here? Did she come to beg for her job back? Have security remove her from the building immediately." Brendan Cole laughed a short, ugly bark. "The audacity. Some people just don't know when they're beaten." Geller raised a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Arthur." "And why the hell not?" Finch sputtered. "Because, Geller said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You would be removing the single largest owner of this company, the principal of Prometheus Capital, your new boss." The silence in the room was absolute, profound. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. The board members stared at Geller as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. Brendan Cole's face had frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his cheeks. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The boardroom doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She didn't look at Brendan. She didn't look at the stunned board members. Her eyes were locked on one person, Arthur Finch. She walked the length of the table with a steady, unhurried pace, her heels clicking a death knell on the polished hardwood floor. She stopped, not at the side of the table, but at the empty chair right next to Finch's at its head. She placed her leather portfolio on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and steady, amplified by the room's shocked silence. "Arthur, you're in my seat." Finch stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, fury, and dawning horror. This is a joke, a prank." Gala cleared his throat. "It is my duty to inform the board," he announced formally, "that as of Friday, 17:00 hours, Prometheus Capital, a firm wholly controlled by Ms. Isabella Rossi, has acquired 51.7% of Innovatech Financial. All necessary filings have been submitted to the SEC. We have the votes. The first order of business for this meeting is a motion to remove Arthur Finch as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, effective immediately." One of Gala's associates began passing out documents to the stunned board members. The numbers were all there in black and white, irrefutable. Brendan finally found his voice. It was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Izzy, how? What is this?" She finally turned her head and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, just a vast, chilling indifference. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture, a background object that has ceased to be of any importance. "It's called a hostile takeover, Brendan," she said simply, as if explaining a basic concept. "It's what happens when you underestimate your competition. You of all people should know that." She then turned her attention back to Finch, whose face was now a dangerous shade of purple. "The motion to remove Mr. Finch from his positions. All in favour?" Gala's hand shot up. Prometheus Capital votes aye with its entire 51.7% block. The other board members, seasoned veterans of corporate warfare, knew a lost cause when they saw one. Their loyalty was to their stock options, not to a deposed king. One by one, their hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Finch slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage, a travesty I built this company. You ran it into the ground," Isabella countered, her voice cutting through his tirade. "You relied on legacy systems, cronyism, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the future of finance. This company has been stagnant for a decade. That ends today." She looked at Gala. "Second motion. A motion to appoint Ms. Isabella Rossi as the new Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board," Gala announced. Prometheus Capital votes aye. It was a formality. In the space of 10 minutes, Isabella Rossi had gone from being a fired, disgraced analyst to the absolute ruler of the company that had cast her out. She stood up and walked to the head of the table as Finch, sputtering with impotent rage, was gently but firmly escorted from the room by Gala's associates. She looked at the faces around the table, shocked, wary, fearful. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "The era of complacency at Innovatech is over. We are no longer a follower. We are a predator. We will be implementing a new proprietary trading algorithm that will render every single one of our competitors obsolete. The name of that project is Chimera." She let the name sink in. "Some of you will adapt to this new reality. You will thrive. Those of you who resist change, who cling to the old ways, will be rendered redundant. Your positions will be eliminated." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed finally on Brendan Cole. He looked physically ill, ashen-faced and trembling. "Oh, and Mr. Cole," she said, her voice laced with ice, "thank you for your consultancy. Your services are no longer required. Security will see you out." She watched as he was led from the room, not with rage, but with a kind of detached pity. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was just irrelevant, a footnote in her story. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, stood at the head of the table in the boardroom of the company she now owned. She wasn't just the CEO. Thanks to the valuation of Chimera, which Silas Black's accountants had pegged in the low 10 figures. She was on paper the youngest self-made female billionaire in the nation. She looked out the panoramic window at the sprawling city below. It wasn't his world anymore. It was hers, and she was just getting started. The first 24 hours of Isabella's reign were a masterclass in controlled demolition and strategic reconstruction. The news of the hostile takeover and her appointment as CEO sent shockwaves through the financial industry. The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "Fired and Analyst 28 buys company, becomes tech's newest billionaire." The story was sensational, but it barely scratched the surface of the silent, swift revolution happening inside the Innovatech tower. Her first act as CEO was to call a company-wide all-hands meeting in the main atrium. The employees gathered a sea of anxious and curious faces. They were expecting a bloodbath. They were expecting a vengeful tyrant. Isabella walked onto the small stage, not with a cohort of lawyers, but alone. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young, almost startlingly so, under the harsh corporate lighting. She tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Isabella Rossi. As of yesterday, I am your new CEO. I know there are a lot of rumors and a lot of fear, so let's dispense with the mystery. Yes, I used to work here as a junior analyst, and yes, I was fired." A murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented honesty. "I was fired," she continued, "because I was building something new, something that the old leadership was too afraid or too blind to understand. That something is Project Chimera, and it is the future of this company, our future." She laid out her vision, not with corporate jargon, but with passion and clarity. She spoke of turning Innovatech from a lumbering dinosaur into a sleek, agile fintech predator. She spoke of innovation, of meritocracy, of rewarding talent over tenure. "For years, your ideas have been stifled by bureaucracy. Your talents have been wasted on outdated systems. That ends now," she declared. "I am not here to punish the past. I am here to build the future. If you are passionate, if you are talented, and if you are willing to work harder than you have ever worked before, you have a place here. If you are here to just collect a paycheck and wait for retirement, I suggest you update your resume." Then came the first of her gambits. "Effective immediately," she announced. "I am dissolving the entire senior management layer directly under the CEO. All departmental vice president positions are hereby vacated." Gasps rippled through the atrium. It was a corporate decapitation. "In their place," she continued, "I will be promoting from within, based on one criterion alone: merit. I've spent the last 3 years watching you work. I know who the real innovators are. I know who the dead weight is." Her eyes scanned the crowd and found a familiar, anxious face. "David Chen, where are you?" David, her former manager, looked terrified as he hesitantly raised his hand. "David," Isabella said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "You were the only manager who believed in my work. You protected it as long as you could. You understand what's coming. I'm promoting you to Chief Technology Officer. Your first task is to assemble a team to integrate Chimera into our core systems. You have an unlimited budget. Get it done." David Chen stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of utter shock before a slow, dawning grin spread across it. A wave of energy, of possibility, surged through the employees. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was a revolution. Throughout the day, Isabella moved with ruthless efficiency. She walked the floors, not with an entourage, but by herself. She had quiet conversations with coders, with junior traders, with administrative assistants. She remembered their names, their projects. By day's end, a new leadership team was in place, comprised of the company's brightest and most overlooked talents. The old guard, the cronies of Arthur Finch, were gone. Late in the afternoon, her assistant, a sharp young woman she'd promoted from the reception pool, informed her she had a visitor. A Mr. Brendan Cole is in the lobby. He insists on seeing you. He says it's personal. Isabella felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a weary finality. Send him up, she said. Brendan entered her new office. Arthur Finch's old office, now stripped of its heavy dark furniture and replaced with minimalist glass and steel. And he looked like a broken man. His bespoke suit was rumpled. His face was pale and drawn. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. Izzy, he began, his voice raspy. I had to see you. I can't believe this. Isabella remained seated behind her vast new desk. She didn't offer him a seat. Brendan, I came to apologize, he said the words, sounding foreign and clumsy in his mouth. What I said, what I did, it was unforgivable. I was a fool. I was arrogant. And I was jealous. Yes, Isabella agreed, her tone neutral. You were. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. My father is... He's furious. Sterling Wakefield is one of Innovatech's biggest clients. He says I've ruined the relationship. I've been suspended. My career is over, Izzy. He was looking for something. Absolution, pity, a lifeline. He was trying to appeal to the woman. He thought he knew the Izzy who would be swayed by his pain, but that woman was gone. Your career is not my concern, Brendan, she said, her voice as cool and hard as the glass of her desk. You made a series of choices. You chose to belittle me. You chose to sabotage me. You chose to align yourself with a failing system because it was comfortable and familiar. These are the consequences of your choices. Tears welled in his eyes. But we loved each other. Doesn't that mean anything? Isabella leaned forward slightly. You loved the idea of me, Brendan. You loved the version of me that fit into your world. The moment I tried to build my own world, you tried to burn it down. That isn't love. It's possession. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. The work I am doing here is going to change the face of finance. I have a company to run. I'm afraid I don't have time for this. She turned and looked out the window at the city stretching out below her. It was a dismissal, more profound and complete than any firing. Defeated Brendan turned and walked out of the office, a ghost from a life she had already left behind. She heard the door click shut. She didn't turn around. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, clean sense of closure. He was a problem that had been solved. Her phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted number. It was from Silas Black. Gala tells me the old guard has been purged. Good. Now the real work begins. Chimera is hungry. It's time to feed it. Don't get distracted by the noise. Your only loyalty is to the future. Isabella smiled. He was right. The past was settled. The future was a blank page, and she held the pen. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The passage of 6 months had not just changed Innovatech Financial. It had forged it into an entirely new element on the periodic table of Wall Street. The old sleepy firm was a distant memory, a fossil preserved in amber. The new Innovatech was a place of breathtaking velocity, a symphony of quiet intensity. The open-plan floors, once a landscape of cubicle farms, were now collaborative pods centered around holographic data streams. The currency here wasn't tenure or titles, it was ideas and execution speed. Isabella had fostered a culture that felt less like a bank and more like a mission control center for the future of capital. A perfect example was playing out on the main screen in her office, a vast expanse of transparent aluminum that dominated one wall. It was 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the closing bell. Innovatech was in the midst of a silent, high-stakes duel with Goliath National Bank, the oldest and most arrogant titan of the industry, over a massive block of shares in a biotech firm that had just announced a breakthrough. Goliath's traders, using traditional models, were selling short betting. The announcement was a speculative bubble that would pop. Chimera, however, had seen something else. It had cross-referenced the clinical trial data with an obscure materials science journal, noting that the new drug's delivery mechanism relied on a polymer whose sole patent holder had just been quietly acquired by a tech conglomerate. It wasn't just a drug breakthrough, it was a vertically integrated manufacturing pipeline in the making. Chimera hadn't just seen the signal, it had understood the entire ecosystem around it. "They're still shorting," David Chen said, standing beside Isabella. He looked less like a TO and more like an excited kid with the world's best video game. "They think we're insane." "Let them," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on the cascading numbers. "Insanity is just a vision they can't comprehend yet." At precisely 4:00 p.m., the closing bell rang. A moment later, a news alert flashed across the wire. The tech conglomerate confirmed a multi-billion-dollar partnership with the biotech firm. The stock didn't just rise, it went supernova. Goliath National lost an estimated $900 million in a single afternoon. Innovatech, thanks to Chimera's foresight, had netted over $1 billion. It was just another Tuesday. This kind of success had made Isabella Rossi a legend, but it also made her a target. The industry, terrified of what it couldn't understand, began to fight back. Rivals tried to poach her staff with astronomical offers they all refused. Whispers of illegal insider trading circulated, prompting a discreet SEC inquiry that found nothing because there was nothing to find. Chimera wasn't cheating, it was just playing a different game entirely. The most persistent thorn in her side was a man named Nathan Pierce, a Pulitzer-winning journalist for the New York Ledger. Pierce was old-school cynical and smelled a rat. He didn't believe in magic bullets, and he saw Isabella as a financial warlock who needed to be exposed. His weekly columns were a masterclass in insinuation, painting her as a reckless gambler, a stooge for some hidden benefactor, or a fraud whose luck was about to run out. "The rise of Isabella Rossi and Innovatech isn't a fairy tale," he wrote in his latest piece. "It's a black box, and history teaches us that black boxes on Wall Street are never filled with miracles. They are filled with secrets, and those secrets eventually rot the entire system." Isabella read his column on her tablet as she sat in the back of her car, gliding through the city's neon-drenched streets toward her apartment. She should have been angry, but she mostly felt a strange sense of weariness. Pierce, like Brendan, like Finch, was another man trying to fit her into a narrative he understood. They couldn't accept that the phenomenon was simply a brilliant woman and her even more brilliant creation. The cost of this constant battle was her isolation. Her penthouse apartment was a marvel of minimalist design and smart home technology, a sterile paradise with views that could make an emperor weep. But it was also an empty fortress. Her friends from before her meteoric rise struggled to relate to her new reality. Dating was impossible, a minefield of sycophants and gold diggers. Her life had become her work, and her only true confidant was David Chen. It was during one of their late-night work sessions that the next chapter truly began. David had been running a deep learning protocol, allowing Chimera to search for patterns beyond the financial markets. The results he brought to her were staggering and terrifying. "It's not just supply chains, Isabella," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's everything. Based on massive atmospheric data, ocean temperatures, and deforestation rates, Chimera is predicting a catastrophic crop failure in Southeast Asia within 18 months, a famine that will affect 50 million people. It's also identified 5 coastal cities that are structurally unprepared for the sea level rise predicted over the next decade. It's mapping the future of human suffering." They stared at the data, at the cold, hard projections of impending disaster. All the money they had made, all the rivals they had crushed, suddenly felt meaningless. They had created a crystal ball, and it was showing them a vision of hell. "We can't just sit on this," Isabella whispered, the weight of the information pressing down on her. We can't just use this to short agricultural futures. It's monstrous. This was the moment her ambition crystallized into purpose. The power they held wasn't for accumulating wealth, it was a tool for intervention. We're going to create a new division, she declared, the idea taking shape with electrifying clarity. A non-profit arm of the company. We'll fund it with 10% of Innovatech's quarterly profits. We're going to build early warning systems and give them to governments for free. We're going to preemptively invest in drought-resistant crops and fund their distribution. We're going to finance the seawalls those cities need before the floods come. We won't just predict the future, we'll protect it. They called it the Atlas Initiative, a name that signified the immense burden they were choosing to lift. The announcement of the Atlas Initiative was met with confusion by the street and cynicism by critics like Nathan Pierce, who dismissed it as a clever PR stunt to deflect regulatory scrutiny. But for Isabella, it was the only thing that mattered. A week later, a simple, unmarked cardboard box arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single leather-bound first-edition copy of a treatise on modern neural networks, the very book she had packed in her box on that humiliating last day at the old Innovatech. Tucked inside was a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the handwriting a strong, angular script. Isabella, they will always mistake the architect for a gambler. They will always fear the tools they cannot comprehend. I once built a machine to see the future. I used it to win a war, and then I walked away. You have built a machine to save the future. Do not make my mistake. Do not walk away. The world needs its architects. The ghost in the machine is proud. SB. Isabella held the book, the heavy paper of the note cool against her fingers. It was more than an acknowledgement. It was a charge, a warning, and a blessing from the only person on the planet who could truly understand the path she was on. She looked from the book to the flowing data on the screens, then out the window at the city below. The journey had been forged in the fires of betrayal and humiliation. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and cast out. Brendan Cole was a faded memory, a cautionary tale. Arthur Finch and Nathan Pierce were just voices from an old world, their skepticism the dying echo of an obsolete era. Her story had never truly been about revenge. Revenge was a closed loop, a snake eating its own tail. Her story was one of creation, of building something where nothing existed before. She hadn't just bought a company, she had given it a soul. She had built an empire, not of money, but of purpose. And as she stood there, the architect of tomorrow holding a message from the ghost of yesterday, she knew with absolute certainty that her life's work, the cute little hobby that had sparked a revolution, was ready for its grandest, most important task. What an incredible journey of resilience, intelligence, and ultimate triumph. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Her refusal to be broken, her unwavering belief in her own vision, and her transformation of personal pain into world-changing power is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been underestimated or told their dream was just a hobby. What did you think of Isabella's epic comeback? Was her takeover ruthless or justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as motivating as I did, please give this video a huge thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that their ambition is valid and their dreams are worth fighting for. And of course, if you want more stories of incredible underdogs who change the game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening.